Hi, my name is Annette Rubalcaba, and I will be presenting the external rotators of the hip. So to start off, the locations of the external rotators of the hip, some parts are located on the sacrum, also on the ischium, posterior part, and in other parts of the hip bone. The muscles include the parafemoris, gemellus superior and inferior, obturator, externus and internus, and quadratus femoris. For the origin and the insertion of the external rotators of the hip, the origin is from the sacrum, and like I mentioned, the posterior portions of the ischium and obturator foramen. And the insertion is the proximal femur. And again, just indicating the parts, the muscle of the rotator, the external rotator of the hip, as I mentioned before. Specifically, as you can see, from one is obturator externus, which is the blue muscle. Obturator internus, which is number 2, is the posterior part. Number 3, parafemoris, that's located at the origin sacrum, and then proximal femur. Quadratus femoris, which is number 4, is on the portion side of the posterior portion side of the ischium. And then proximal femur. Gemellus inferior, number 5. Same thing. Portion part of the ischium, and then proximal femur. And lastly, number 6, gemellus superior, which is in the portions of the ischium and proximal of the femur. And to go deeper into the origin insertion onto the bone, like I mentioned, for the hip or the pelvis, hip bone, most parts of the origin of those different external rotators of the hip muscles, that there's some portions that are from the originating from the ischium, and then there is one that originates from the sacrum. And so from all those 6 muscles, they will all insert onto the posterior part of the femur, which then would be the proximal femur. The joint that's involved of the external rotators of the hip is the ball and socket joint, as you can see, where all the ligaments are attached. And not only that, for it to be a ball and socket joint, the femur, pretty much the head of it is like a ball, and where that femur of the ball inserts into the hip part of the hip bone, which then the ligaments will be attached to that, which will then, when we move our leg, we're able to move it abductly, abductly, like with abduction, adduction, and then flexion and extension, which will then, all of that with all the ligaments being attached onto the femur, and with the hip bone, it stabilizes the hip bone. So our daily usage of the muscle and actions include the lateral rotation, which is just moving the leg away from the midline of the body. And with our horizontal abduction, Same thing, moving away from the body, but horizontally rather than just rotating from the foot. We will then move horizontally away from the body. So how do we stretch our external rotators? Well, for one, we can do a exercise that's called clamshell, which you would lie on your side on the floor. You use a resistant band that's above the knee. Legs are being together, and knees are bent at a 90-degree angle. And then by raising your knee as high as you can while you're keeping your hips sternly keeping your hips not rotating and your other knee by not lifting it up, you should be good. And then bringing it back down to your starting position. Another way to strengthen your external rotators of the hip is the fire hydrant. Your starting position will be in all fours, your hands and knees on the floor. Your knee is bent at a 90-degree angle. You lift the knee horizontally away from the body, which will then be opening up the hip and then returning back to your starting position. To make it more challenging, like I mentioned, the clamshell, to make that exercise more challenging, you can same thing, lying on your side while you're lifting half of the body, which is your upper body specifically, and same movement you will be doing, as well as still using your resistant bands. Still keeping your resistant bands and then keeping your core strong throughout the whole time. Legs together, knees bent at a 90-degree angle. You will then raise the knee, keeping the hip rotator as it was from your starting position, as well as your knee that is bent, your other knee that you're not lifting. So not lifting the knee that's just on the floor, and then bringing back down with your other knee. And for the fire hydrant, to make it a challenging exercise, you can add a resistant band. You're still going to be at your starting position on all four hands and knees, on all fours, which is your hands and your knees, your knee bent on a 90-degree angle. And again, like I mentioned, adding that resistance and then lifting the knee horizontally away from the body, which will then be opening up the hip and then returning back to your position. To modify these exercises, for instance, the clamshell, rather than being on the floor, you can actually be standing up. In this sense, it would be more of a squat. However, what is different is you will start with your starting position. You will have the resistant bands above your knee, and then having your feet pointing laterally, and then you're squatting down, keeping your core strong, and then coming right back up to your starting position. For the next exercise, the fire hydrant, the modification would be standing fire hydrant, which would then you are starting your position standing up rather than being on all fours. And on this one, you will keep one foot or leg keeping the balance, and the other one will be bent 90 degrees, which will then you would still be opening up the hip, moving abductally, and then going back from the starting position. So how to stretch safely and effectively with your external rotators of the hip. One stretch would be seated floor stretch. This one you will be sitting on the ground. One leg is out, the other one is bent, the foot is on the thigh, and then you will reach the extended foot, extended leg, and try to reach for the toe, holding for 30 seconds. The next stretch would be a pigeon toe stretch. This one you are on the floor. One leg is bented up front. The other leg is behind you, keeping that foot flexed. And then using your hands for the support and sitting upright. And you will be holding this for 30 seconds. To make it more challenging of these stretches, like I mentioned, you would still, on the first stretch, the seated toe stretch, so you would still be positioning yourself on the floor, one leg out, the other bent, and the foot on the thigh. You will then be reaching to the extended leg, to the extended leg to reach for the toe. And to make it more challenging, you will actually be bending further forward rather than just reaching for the toe and then holding it for 30 seconds and that's it. You would actually be reaching further down, bending forward, and you would be holding that for 30 seconds. For the other stretch, the pigeon toe stretch, you will be doing the same thing, being on the floor with leg bent up front, other leg behind you, keeping the foot flexed, using the hands to support you, and you will be sitting upright. However, to make it that stretch challenging, you will get a deeper stretch by bending forward and then holding that stretch for 30 seconds. For modifications of these stretches, for the seated toe stretch, you can be standing rather than sitting down on the floor. You can stand up. That's your starting position, and then bend down as far as you can and just hold for 30 seconds. For the pigeon toe stretch, you can be seated on the chair, bringing your one leg bent to put it on top of the neutral leg, and then bend forward and hold that for 30 seconds. Common injuries from the external rotators of the hip and causes of that are overuse of the muscle, which means when you're doing the same movement over and over periodically and not giving a chance to just give that muscle a break, that can cause an injury to the hips. And the other one, another cause for a common injury would be no stretching. So you don't stretch before you, let's just say you go play a game. You're running and you can pull one of those muscles because you didn't warm up your muscles and not give yourself time to actually stretch out that muscle before going onto the field to go play. And that's my presentation. Thank you.